few weeks ago now, I showed you guys this horror mod. You loved it. A lot of you seemed very invested or interested in the future of that mod, and today I'm happy to bring you some pretty massive updates. What I originally showed you was just one teaser of the 5 we now have, including some raw gameplay of this new DLC-sized overhaul known as Grim. So a little bit of background if maybe you missed the first video, or hey, maybe you're just forgetful. What Grim is a new and up-and-coming DLC-sized mod for Fallout 4. As you can tell by some of the stuff you've been seeing in the background, it's going to be a horror overhaul, making the game significantly scarier, and actually doing this in several different ways. There's going to be some new quests, a lot of new NPCs, a visual overhaul, but also an auditory overhaul to go along with it. Unlike some other horror mods, this one's actually going to feature totally new game mechanics. There's going to be this thing called the curse that you can enable, and then it will drastically change your game, causing witches and other monsters to spawn, but also having unique gameplay segments where the world will be visually changed unless you get back to the regular one. And as you can probably tell looking at some of the background footage, one of the big differences with this mod compared to others is it's going to be fairly comprehensive. It's not just adding in a new ENB or new visual effects, not just new creatures, but all of this and more together in one singular download to really transform your Fallout 4. That's a broad overview of what this mod is doing, but in some of these more recent videos we actually have gotten a better idea of some of the finer details. Seeing some of these new features or creatures in action, I wanted to point some of them out to you. I'll have links to everything I'm showing you down below, but with there being almost 30 minutes of footage of this mod now, there might be some stuff you missed if you only click on one video or the other. As I mentioned, part of this mod is going to be the optional ENB preset. You don't have to have this on, but if you did want it on, you can see in this little segment some of the drastic changes this could bring to the visuals. It'll make things look a bit dirtier, a bit darker, and definitely give it that horror tone, something you've probably seen in a lot of horror movies to begin with, but it is cool as it does offer a lot of out of the box and pretty easy customizability. You go from one look to another relatively quickly and without much effort on your part. But outside of even just some of those more typical visual overhauls, there's going to be a little bit more atypical ones, such as some additional and updated footage on the found footage look that will be available through this mod. This part's pretty straightforward. Similar to the ENBs I showed you earlier, it'll be another effect that you can apply, and it'll give you that found footage visual that you've probably seen through many movies, actually some of the most successful horror movies. It's a pretty cool visual, and maybe after a while it will get a bit old or you want to switch to something else. I would say at least for the early levels of Fallout 4 where things are particularly frightening, this will be a pretty cool way to differentiate this from some other playthroughs. And it also offers this in a 4:3 style, so that boxy screen you've seen in some of the early 2000s or even the late 90s. That effect in particular is really freaking awesome and definitely takes me back to some of those old school movies. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, the visuals aren't the only part of this. In some of this new gameplay, we also get a listen at some of the awesome audio and custom music made for this mod. There's quite a bit of this, and as you could hear, it's really well done. Even just watching some of those segments, it definitely gets your heart racing, and I could only imagine actually getting to play it for myself. And although all of that looks awesome, I know a lot of people really focus on some of the things that this is adding in, the concrete details we could see, such as in the way of these new and unique creatures. We see a wide variety throughout this gameplay, and even perhaps a wider variety than any other Fallout 4 mod adds in thus far. NPC mods just aren't all that popular, but we could see some pretty terrifying things like a Grim Lord that seems to be some kind of boss enemy at a certain location. These little lurkers that seem fairly common walking on all fours, but also have some pretty terrifying sounds and movements. This is definitely nightmarish. One particularly cool and what will inevitably be a very frustrating enemy shown off is the Ghost. This is actually a cloaked enemy, so it isn't immediately obvious where it is as it has invisibility going on. The Ghost in and of itself doesn't seem to be super powerful, but I imagine just throughout the night as you're exploring, having one one of these sneak up on you or just attack you out of nowhere will be terrifying, especially if there's already other enemies around or you're trying to sneak around. We see a werewolf, which is functionally very similar to a Deathclaw, but looks awesome and is actually a lot scarier in my eyes. Cursed undead or skeletons seem to also be a fairly common enemy, almost like a replacement for some of the ghouls. These are kind of cool because I feel like this mod will do a good job at just replacing the constant, hey, it's another raider, hey, it's another ghoul. It'll add in a bit more variety in those kind of throwaway or typical enemies you encounter. During one segment, you get ran up on by a hell thing. This seems to be potentially during one of the cursed segments. That creature in particular is straight nightmare fuel. And one of the other interesting or typical enemies you do see throughout this are actually zombies, which will be another nice addition to the game. And frankly, we get a glance at a lot of other stuff, some of the new and custom weapons that are being added in with this, some other enemies that I don't want to go too in depth on, and again, some more gameplay elements of this new curse mechanic. Altogether, it looks particularly awesome. If you want more real-time updates, there actually is a Discord server for all of Looping's mods, including this one. He recently has mentioned that this is approaching feature complete status. He describes how now he's really working on the loot for the mod as well as one of the quests that it will involve. But seemingly some of the hard stuff is done, and even just from the gameplay, you can see a lot of work is already complete. There's no explicit release date, but you could certainly be hopeful that we'll see this in the next couple of years. Again, if you want more updates around this, I'll have a link to all of those videos and the Discord down below. It definitely is something worth following. I am definitely excited for it. I almost want to just download this mod and do a live stream of it so you can see my fear and terror in real time, face cam and everything. But with this upcoming mods episode, I didn't want to just feature this one mod, so there's actually some other stuff I want to highlight also that has been recently worked on in the Fallout modding community. We got to look at what is seemingly going to be a new weapon pack coming to Fallout 4, that with the Insurgency SANDSTORM Overhaul. If you're not familiar, Insurgency SANDSTORM is an existing game you could get right now. It's somewhat similar to some of those other more tactical or realistic modern shooters, but more of a hybrid, not being overly realistic. And in effect, what this mod is attempting to do is actually integrate several of the weapons from that game into Fallout 4. Some game developers are pretty okay with this when you use some of their content, as long as it is typically not for profit. And since Insurgency in particular started out as a mod, they are particularly lenient when it comes to other mods using their own content. Either way, as you can see from some of these images, this looks amazing. Naturally, it all looks very similar to what you see in Insurgency, and that is a good sign. We can see some of the various attachments and modifications in action. Even though it might sound simple getting this all into Fallout 4, it still is a relatively complicated process and does require quite a bit of work. But even outside of just those images, we get quite a few videos of some of the reload animations in action that look great. And a lot of these are pretty unique and custom. Fallout 4 really just doesn't have weapon packs. If this releases as one concrete pack of weapons, I could see a lot of people getting very excited and downloading this one almost immediately. But hey, maybe you wanted something a little bit bigger, then we also do have the Tiger Tank. What this is going to do is add in a Tiger Tank into Fallout 4. There's actually not too many details as to exactly how this will work. You can see the tank is actually equipped with some Enclave flags, and based off some of the later images, it looks like it actually is functional, maybe a drivable vehicle of some kind. And I'm going to say it probably is because there's been other images and videos posted of an Apache helicopter also in Fallout 4. We can see an image of this one, but a video that shows it in action with all of the weapons working, which is pretty awesome. The flying on this helicopter, and I'm sure the driving on the tank won't be the best, which is natural. It's Fallout 4. It's really not made to have vehicles, but something that is pretty interesting, especially in this helicopter gameplay, even though other mods have attempted to integrate weapons into vehicles in the past, the helicopter gunplay, without a doubt to me, looks the best out of all of this. It looks like the most fun, the most usable, and something that would be enjoyable to use even if the flying aspect does suffer from some of those engine limitations. But hey, maybe you want something a little bit more grounded. Alternatively, we also do have the Rising Storm 2 M60. And as you can guess, it's going to add in a brand new M60 into Fallout 4, and it looks awesome. Although, of course, parts of this coming from Rising Storm, with a similar deal going on how it worked with Insurgency as I mentioned earlier, this will have some custom aspects. It'll use the reload animations we saw with the other M60 mod from War Daddy with permission, but also custom sounds by Navarro. This looks really cool. I know people love heavy weapons like this, as there simply aren't a ton of them in the modding scene, or even just in Fallout 4 by default, this being a very iconic weapon and I'm sure a lot of us are going to enjoy using it. But with all that being said, that's going to wrap it up for the Fallout 4 modding part of this video. Before we end things off, I do want to share today's psychology fun fact of the day. I haven't done one of these in weeks, but considering right now is actually right when I would have just started going back to class, it seems like maybe I should open up one of my old notebooks or textbooks and reteach myself something and then tell it to you. So this is going to be on consolidation in memory, something that actually applies to all of you. This might be otherwise known as Jost's Law, J-O-S-T, if you actually want to look it up for yourself. And although you can say this is necessarily a fact because it isn't 100% proven, it's still just a heavily supported theory. It is, again, heavily supported. And it's actually counterintuitive. Basically, the idea is, let's say you have a memory from today and a memory from a week ago. Jost's Law would argue that the memory from a week ago is actually stronger due to the process of consolidation occurring. The idea basically being that when you actually create a memory, there is a prolonged process that goes along with it actually being encoded and stored in your brain, in your memory. A fresh memory, such as something that just happened earlier today, hasn't really gone through that process. Conversely, a memory that is quite old at this point has gone through that process, which should potentially provide benefits to you actually recalling that and its staying power in your memory. So what exactly is going on with this process or how it actually occurs isn't totally clear. There's a lot we don't know about the brain, but it definitely seems like there's some kind of process that kind of solidifies or strengthens your memories just as you have them. Some evidence for this, you've probably heard of amnesia, retrograde amnesia in particular. Let's say you bump your head and suddenly you can't remember some stuff. It'll almost always be the stuff that has happened to you more recently. Some of those old memories are often still intact. The argument being this is a result of those older memories going through the process of consolidation and thus being stronger. They are harder to forget, while the newer memories didn't complete that process or not as far in that process and thus are forgotten. Also, and this is one of the important parts, sleep likely plays a large role in this. There's some competing theories as to what exactly is going on, but it has been shown that sleeping will actually consolidate your memories and thus make them stronger. So if you're studying and you want to remember something for a test in a week, getting a good amount of sleep is actually a really important role in that. So yeah, that is the concept of memory consolidation and how it actually probably plays a pretty big role in what you remember and more importantly, what you can't remember. As always, again, I thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, but with all that being said, I hope to see you all next time. Later.